Please subscribe to hear more Cryptid Tales. If you like the story you heard, give us a thumbs up and feel free to leave us a comment. If you'd like to hear your own cryptid encounter on Cryptid Tales, send us an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com.
I live in southeast Arkansas. Been here since I was born. My house isn't far out of town, but it's not all the way in the sticks either. My house is elevated off the ground because of it being lower elevation for the area. It was around 7:30 in the afternoon, and I was lying down reading my book when I started hearing what sounded like wood knocks. That was very close. I sat there listening, straining my ears, trying to figure out what the sound was and where it was coming from. I live alone, and my closest neighbors are about 200 yards through the woods that are around my property. Thinking that one of them was doing some last-minute repairs, I continued to read my book. Roughly around 10 minutes later, I hear the creeping sound of my porch as something was walking up the stairs. There was an enfolding smell that surrounded my house. I'm not trying to say curse words in the email I'm sending you, but the best way I can describe it is a musty, nasty skunk smell with a mixture of swamp ass in it. My porch is a wraparound with a staircase leading up it. It's about 4 feet off the ground and old. Anyways, as I'm listening to this sound coming up the stairs, I noticed both of my dogs were in my closet shaking. Now, to the listeners, this may not mean anything, but both of my dogs are large breeds of pit bulls. They both weigh about 130 each and are not scared of anything in these woods. I watched them run hogs, deer, and a bear from the property before. They are not in any way scared of anything, but here they were, shaking like a chihuahua. Me, taking that hint, I grabbed my pistol from my nightstand. It's nothing spectacular, but it's my grandpa's .44 Magnum revolver he carried around everywhere before he passed away. I made sure it was loaded and crept to my front door. My porch stairs line up with my front door. I say that because when I looked through the peephole on my door, I could see nothing but black. I found that kind of strange since at this time of year, it shouldn't be completely black until about 8. As I sit there contemplating my thoughts as to what's going on, I hear the deepest guttural growl I've ever heard in my life. It was coming from behind my door. So I peeped through it again, and I could see my porch. Every hair on my body was on end, and I had the feeling that I was being watched. I slowly scanned through all the possible windows I could be seen from, and when I finally made it to the window, I seen this thing staring me down. It looked to be about 9 feet tall. I say that because a good portion of its body was over the railing of my porch, which is 4 foot even. I didn't know why I'd done what I did, but I fired 2 shots through the window and into this thing. It took off like a bullet, bulldozing down trees and brush that was in its way. I remember it being human-like, but not human-like at the same time. Its face was like a Neanderthal's, but hair-covered. Its hands were like ours, only a lot bigger. The muscle tone of it reminded me of what Hulk looked like in the Avengers, just not green. I stepped out on the porch and the neighbors were pulling in asking if everything was okay. And I told them that I had a bear come too close for comfort and scared it away. They all left besides the old man that owns the cattle farm across the road from my property. He looked at me for a good minute or so and said, "You seen the hairy giant, didn't you?" I asked him how he knew, and he said he was across the road fixing a fence when it screamed and the gunshots went off. He asked me about it, and I told him the details, and as plain as day he said, "You got lucky. Wait until the big one comes out." Then he got in his truck and drove away. I have since put a reinforced door on both sides of the house and replaced every window with thick plexiglass. I also bought an AR-15 and installed motion detector lights all around my house. I haven't had another one get that close again, nor do I want to. In June of 2018, I was invited to go fishing with a friend and his son Kyle to a fly-in lake out of Red Lake, Ontario. Jeff has been a friend of mine for over 30 years, and we both attended the police academy in a large Midwest city. We are both retired now and decided to bring along a mutual friend named Chad, who is still a deputy sheriff. Jeff's son Kyle went with his father and grandfather to the same lake 9 years prior. The lake has only one cabin on it, and we could portage 4 others. We would be the first 4 there in 9 months. The flight out of Red Lake is 20 to 25 minutes, deep into the Woodland Caribou Provincial Park. Just before we left, he dropped a bomb on me. He said 9 years ago, he was fishing with his father-in-law and son on the dock when a 25-pound rock flew over the cabin and splashed into the lake. Then, another rock of the same size flew over and landed on some pallets, smashing them to pieces. His son Kyle also told me the same thing. Jeff said the distance was about 75 yards total, or more. I thought he was joking at first, but he was dead serious. He said he had his son wait there while he and his father-in-law went to check out the other side of the cabin. He said when he got to the cabin, they saw an 8-foot-tall black Sasquatch heading up the hill into the woods. He said it walked on 2 feet. I didn't know what to think, other than he saw a bear, and the rocks were just fish jumping or rocks falling from the hillside. Well, as soon as we got there, we didn't waste any time getting fishing. I was in the boat with Chad and did not get more than 100 yards from the cabin when we heard a tree go down. Throughout the day, we heard whistles, vocals, and a howl. We both heard what I described as a small girl making gibberish noises. Chad said he thought it was a baby in the woods. There was no way to check it out due to the steep terrain. Right after we heard the vocals, a rock the size of a golf ball struck our boat that was 50 yards from shore. Mind you, we are in the middle of nowhere and are the only 4 on the lake. I could see the other boat a quarter mile away, so I knew it was not the other 2 pulling a prank. At sundown, Chad came into the cabin and said he heard a loud crash in the woods. Before we went to sleep, I had to set up my CPAP machine, but the power supply to the battery was wrong. So we had to put a generator on top of an old refrigerator and run it through my window. It was very noisy, so I got earplugs. About 5 minutes later, I heard the loudest knock in my life across the cove. Then 5 seconds later, another one, but on the cabin side of the cove. The second closer one, not as loud, but still very loud to hear it with earplugs in and a generator going. It sounded like the noise you hear when some pro throws a strike in a bowling alley. Not the pins falling over, but the initial strike. It was like I could feel it as well as hear it through the partially open window. The next day, I put all of my 275 pounds into a tree knock, and I could not come close to the volume I heard the night before. The next day and night, nothing. Sunday, we heard unusual whistles and a howl. That night, around 2:30 a.m., I heard a loud crash, and the whole cabin shook. This is a huge cabin, and it felt like a car ran into it. As I scrambled out of bed, another big bang and the whole cabin shook again. I came out of the room and all 3 of the others were in their beds, though wide awake now. That next morning, I was the first to the outhouse and found a 6-foot fence post laying mostly in the outhouse. This post is heavy and was like a pointed railroad tie. I also recovered a hair, but I think it was a mule deer hair. It was grayish-white with red tip. I was now convinced there was either a Bigfoot messing with us or some indigenous natives who might be homesteading in the woods. Monday night was quiet. The next night was the last. Again, around 2:30 to 3 a.m., I woke up from something and went out to the living room area. Jeff was on the couch. He claims something is throwing rocks at the cabin. Sure enough, a rock hits the cabin. All of us were inside at the time. I heard movement and a weird vocalization. I armed myself with a bowie knife and a spear I made the day I found the post in the outhouse. I went outside, but didn't see anything. The next day, I found what could have been a footprint, or something scraped the hard, compact dirt and pine needles away. No discernible toes, though. We had planned to go back in 5 years, but now I'm hooked and I want to go back as soon as possible with recorders and trap cameras. When Jeff asked the pilot/owner about the Bigfoot around the cabin, he turned pale as a ghost and meekly said he knew nothing about it. He sold that outpost that very year after having it since the 60s. Maybe he did not want the liability. I hope he sold it to someone who will keep it open for fishermen to come back to. I know I will if I can. Sincerely, not a skeptic anymore.